Jeff, I appreciate you coming up here all the way from Austin. Jeff Gonzalez, for people that don't know you, he's a retired or former Navy SEAL and shooting extraordinaire, and is going to walk us through some concealed carry techniques and stuff. But first, give us a little background.
I was very lucky. I kind of came out of high school, went right into the Navy, right to BUD/S, right to my SEAL command, and right downrange into my first combat experience. So I was very, very lucky. I cut my teeth down in Central and South America during the narco-terrorism time period. It was awesome. It was great, especially as a new guy, to kind of get that experience. I left the Navy and I started doing the same job overseas that I was doing for the government, but just doing it for private organizations and other government agencies. And in that time period, I stood up the company Trident Concepts, and it's been 20 years since I stood up Trident Concepts.
Oh wow!
I know, it's hard to believe. I've got a,
So you've been out for 20 years.
Yeah, it rolled over. There was a couple of
overlap years.
Yeah, but for the most part, yeah, it's been a while, and I've got a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old right now to remind me how long it's been. So,
yeah.
But it's been. I am so grateful, very appreciative, both of the military experience, my post-military experience, how everything has kind of evolved for me, how I've been able to influence and shape our industry to kind of get it where I want it to be, where I personally believe that we need to be going. I couldn't be happier,
Yeah.
I guess I could be happier, but I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
I'm content.
You're content. Getting into what we're really going to dive in today at a broad kind of level, we all realize that, man, the supply chain, there's issues there. At an individual level, most Americans' resourcefulness really isn't all that great. They
Agreed.
talked about this before. They bought toilet paper instead of the rice and the beans. And so seeing all that,
Yeah.
and you being in the gun world,
Yeah.
what did you take away from all that?
Two things, really. First, a lot of people who were what I consider to be gun agnostic. They didn't really have an opinion for or against it. But you throw a pandemic into the mix, and they became very pro-gun in the sense that, they recognize they're smart enough to where they can read the environment and recognize that they're on their own.
Yeah.
There's nobody coming to help them. This pandemic is crazy. The protesting, the defunding of the police, all of that combined led them to go down a road that they didn't think they would probably ever go down, which is buying a gun, bringing a gun into their home. So that was the first thing.
And what were their reasons? Remember, you
Yeah,
covered it earlier when we were talking.
A lot of them were coming to the realization, and I think we live in a bubble. I think most people live in a bubble, which is we live in a civilized society, right? And we are so close. There's such a thin veneer between civilization and chaos. And I think a lot of those people started to get a picture. They could look through, the veneer was so thin, they could look through it and see what was on the other side, that chaos. And they realized that, to protect themselves, to protect their families, their home, their right to live, required them to take matters into their own hand, which meant going out and buying a gun for the first time, bringing a gun into their home, learning what gun ownership meant and safe gun ownership. And it was great to get that perspective from so many of them, because I would have honest conversations with the majority of them. Sometimes I was very surprised, because you just kind of make a stereotype about some of these, how people approach you and how they start talking to you. And then all of a sudden they open up and they give you this completely different perspective that you would not have thought about, would not have thought from them.
So they were literally pulling their heads out of the sand.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden fear set in.
Without a doubt.
And they're like, I'm getting a gun.
I think it was fear and an appreciation for what reality really looked like. Because I think a lot of times people just kind of gloss over reality, gloss over the amount of violence that exists in our world. It doesn't touch them. It doesn't physically contact them. So they bury their head in the sand or they look away.
Yeah.
And it was hard to look away during the pandemic, very hard. So, the second thing, I think we're at a point where gun ownership is it's at an all-time high, during the pandemic. And it's hard to keep track because we also have so many states now that have embraced constitutional carry, that acknowledge that you don't need permission from the government to actually exercise your constitutional rights. We acknowledge that. I think it was at that time period that a lot of other people started to recognize, oh, okay, wait a minute, I don't have to go through all the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the hoops that they have to jump through. Because many places, many states make it so complicated and laborious that people just wash their hands of it. It's like too much,
Right.
too much problem. Now, with so many states, I think we're up to 27, Ohio might be 28 right now, you know, people are like, okay, that's easy, then I'll go ahead and do that. Whereas before, you know, I don't know if I want to do it. Now, with constitutional carry being so popular, you know, more than, you know, half the union has embraced constitutional carry.
Let's define that. What is constitutional carry?
So it depends. Each state has a slightly different definition. The way I define it is that the state recognizes the Constitution as your right to carry.
So it's the Second Amendment.
Basically, exactly.
Okay.
They just acknowledge that we do not put any restrictions. We do not require any, any firstborn or blood signature from you. It's just we acknowledge that according to the Constitution, you have the right to bear arms.
And what are the pros and cons of constitutional carry?
Lots of pros. The big pro being that if I have to ask permission, it's not a right. So that's one of the things that I appreciate about constitutional carry. It's a recognizing and acknowledging that it's a constitutional right. I shouldn't have to ask permission. One of the cons that I believe is that the rest of the union hasn't we're still looking at shall issue and may issue states. And if you travel outside of your home state, it can become an issue because if you're traveling to another state that doesn't have constitutional carry, you might run into problems there if you want to carry. Reciprocity is a popular give and take between states, and so that's one advantage to the LTC. If you get an LTC and your state has reciprocity with your visiting state, then you can carry, there's an acknowledgement.
That's a license to carry,
Right.
LTC.
LTC. Now, one of the other things that's nice about the LTC, at this current state, if you wanted to go in and purchase a firearm, you would have to go through a background check. That background check requires the gun store to call in and run your name and all your details through a system there that will come back yay or nay. They either say yes you can or no you can't. Like during the pandemic, we saw that system was overwhelmed and literally shut down, crashed for several days.
Yeah.
So even if you wanted to buy a gun, you couldn't because you couldn't go through the background check. But if you have an LTC, to get an LTC, especially in the state of Texas, you have to go through a background check. So you can bypass that by just presenting your LTC card, which denotes the fact that you're in good standing because you were issued this LTC through a background check. And so it kind of circumvents that one process. So, you add a pandemic to the equation and somebody that has to wait for a background check versus somebody that has an LTC that can walk out same day, there's another issue that was an unintended consequence, I think, that made it very clear to me that, if until the rest of the country acknowledges the constitutional carry, then having an LTC may still be a good idea. For travel purposes, not having to wait for your background check. And I think one other value, particularly for a lot of the new gun owners coming in that were agnostic, is at least going through the LTC provides you with a lot of information for somebody that has no information to begin with.
There's a required course.
Exactly.
Where you actually get training. To
It
get the LTC, you have to go through some training. You got to at least pull the trigger a couple times.
Exactly.
And then you get checked off and you get your license in the mail.
Yes.
Whereas constitutional carry, literally go buy a gun, start carrying it today.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of thing.
It is.
Yeah.
So the LTC provides the new gun owner with some pretty valuable information,
Right.
like when and where you can use deadly force, when and where you can and can't carry. Certain locations prohibit your ability to carry. So for that sense, it's actually pretty valuable. And I'm not saying that, like sometimes people will misconstrue my comment. I still believe that constitutional carry is critical to our national security, but at the same time, LTC offers a lot of those new gun owners easier or reducing that barrier to entry because now they're being instructed and educated on the means and manners in which they can carry their firearm.
Yeah, I hear you. I think if you're a constitutional carry person and you don't want to file paperwork with the state, totally get it. You want to maintain
100%.
privacy, carry a gun.
Yeah.
Then those same people need to take their training and all that seriously and go do the right thing because having a bunch of people carrying guns just because the Constitution says is a little scary, right?
Like I'm always going to encourage everybody to walk their own path. But if
Yeah.
if I could influence somebody into a different frame of mind, I would say that if you are forced to actually have to use that firearm to defend yourself, I mean, you and I both know how much time and energy and resources the government put into training us, right? And that was for, like a planned event.
Yeah.
If you're having to use your concealed carry firearm, it's more than likely an unplanned event. You're surprised, you're ambushed, you're having to fend off an attacker. You're way behind the power curve. You're under a tremendous amount of stress, and people don't really appreciate what that does to you. So the more training and education you have, the better equipped you are to handle those unplanned events and come out, victorious. It's one of those things where, you do you, but just remember, just remember that, if the more trained you are, the higher the probability of you surviving that encounter.
Right. I'm with
Because
you on
luck has a little bit to do with this, right? But there's also, the more skilled you are, the more luck you actually get.
that. Yeah. I like that. Going back to deadly force. In a self-defense scenario, I used to always hear, license, constitutional carry, doesn't matter. You pull that trigger, you're probably going to jail that night, even in the self-defense scenario. Is that still true, or what's the deal with that?
A lot depends on the situation,
Yeah.
on the scenario. There are some, we've seen a lot more concealed carriers that have found out the bitterness of our legal system.
Yeah.
Because they did something that, quite frankly, was probably stupid to do in the first place, right? Warning shots are a good example, right? Trying to fend off an attack by firing warning shots. Horrible idea.
You're going to jail on that one.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. That's deadly force. There's only one organization that is legally allowed to fire warning shots. Only one. And that's the Coast Guard. They're the only ones that are actually allowed to fire warning shots. Everybody else is not. Deadly force is deadly force. In this case, you've violated that other person's constitutional rights with deadly force. Now, granted, your intent was to warn them.
You're doing the right thing.
But the courts will look at it from a, again, Lady Justice is blind. So that person who you thought was a bad guy is now claiming the victim, and you are the perpetrator.
What if I'm really nervous and I just happened to shoot 2 rounds into the ground next to me, but it was just ADs? It was just accidental discharges.
I think 1 you can get away with. 2, you might be
I just
pushing.
had an accidental discharge.
I just had an accidental double tap.
There's
My
nothing
bad.
illegal about that.
My bad. But those are the types of things that people can find themselves.
Yeah, you're all of a sudden now you're
Yeah.
the bad guy, you're in jail, and the other guy is driving home.
And the one thing I always try to tell people is, like, there's a lot of courtroom strategies that you need to be thinking about in advance of your defensive gun use.
Yeah.
One of which is that your actions need to be judged by, and the old adage, well, I'd rather be, judged by 12 than carried by 6. I get it. I'm not disagreeing with that. Live to be able to fight that courtroom battle. Get it, all right? But just remember that your actions are also going to be scrutinized to such a, like umpteenth
Can't
level.
even imagine.
It's tough. Like I've had a lot of conversations with lawyers that have had some high profile cases, and it's a whole different ballgame. It's once you get in that courtroom, man, it's tough. And the other thing I will tell people is, if you're going to trial, it's because they believe they have a winnable case, which means that you did something they can actually create their courtroom strategy around to win that case.
Yeah.
And here's the bottom line. Even if you're able to walk out of the court with a not guilty verdict, you just spent umpteen thousands of dollars to do that. Your stress level as you went through that entire process, it just cut years off your life as a result. Easily.
I can't imagine.
And so it's like, I know it sounds very blasé to say that, but it comes at a price. It comes at a cost.
Right.
So
Yeah, I brought that up because I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I got the gun, I can protect myself.
Yeah.
It's, everything's going to be okay as long as
100%.
I'm doing it for the right reason. But
Yep.
even when you're doing it for the right reason, it's going to be a nightmare.
it is. I tell people there are 3 fights that you have to win. The first fight is the fight within yourself to be violent and use deadly force.
Yeah.
A lot of people have an aversion to that, rightfully so, that's okay. But at a certain point, you have to recognize that it's either them or you and your family, right?
Yeah.
You're the bulwark to protecting your family. If you don't do something, then they're free to impose their will upon your family members. So, that's a hard sell. And it's like, it's not about whether or not I'm killing that person, I'm protecting my family. Whatever happens to them, that's on them.
Yeah.
My actions, whatever happened as a result, they brought that upon themselves. That's one thing that I really think people have a hard time accepting. Choosing to choose violence and deadly force is not an easy choice. So make sure you have that conversation early on with yourself and be honest.
Yeah.
Right? Be honest with yourself. Everybody at some point or another has probably had a friend or family member that's been the victim of a violent crime. And so sometimes that right there, just having that conversation with that family member or that friend can help you come to the realization, I don't want to be in that situation. I'm willing to go that route. The second is the actual fight, the ambush, the attack, whatever it is. Win that, right? That's the key. That's the next fight that you have to win. Do anything and everything at your disposal to win that fight. And then the third fight is the fight for your civil liberties and your right to be a free person after the court, has passed their ruling, whatever that verdict is. So, you got to fight them in that order. The fight within yourself, the fight on the streets, and then the fight in the courtroom.
Yeah, that third one is the part that sucks, right?
It does. I mean, it's not pretty.
I think that's the worst one. Fighting for your life? Yeah, got it.
Easy day.
Going to court and letting a bunch of...
That's 5 seconds versus, some of these court trials have lasted months, if not years, and cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Oh, man, it sucks. Yeah. It sucks. It's an imperfect justice system. It's the best one that I've seen. I know that we've traveled the world and seen a lot of other things. So as much as I might badmouth it, it's still better than a lot of other ones out there.
Yeah.
A lot of other countries out there.
Let's dig into concealed carry while you're in the military.
Yeah.
Number one, if you're a military guy,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people assume military people already know how to conceal carry.
Jeez, yeah.
That's not true. Most military do not carry conceal.
There's a very small percentage of guys that actually have to carry concealed in the performance of their duties.
Yeah.
It's small.
It's very small. So you had a chance, obviously I had a lot of that.
Yeah.
Give me an experience conceal carry that probably what's your highlight reel conceal carry in the military?
I think this is a funny one. Okay, so I had to go, and some of the duties that I did involved the observation and collection of information.
Surveillance.
You said it, not me. And I was working in South America at this time, and the place that I was at was a discotheque, which is also code for like a strip joint. And
you were at a strip bar?
Pretty much.
Oh my God. How old were you?
Probably, I was like 19 or 20.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was young still. Maybe 21. It's hard to think back that far. But I went in, and this is a known establishment for cartel members. And that's the reason why we were there. And
the secondary reason why you were there.
Yes. So, and all the ladies that are there, it's Latin America, so there's a very, dance-driven culture. It's a very intimate dance-driven culture. And I remember I had to go through. First of all, I had to get in there through a very cursory pat-down. And the way I carried my pistol back then was very unorthodox. And I got through the pat-down, and I'm nervous. It's the first time doing, like you said, it was all OJT. Back then, it was all OJT. And once I got in there, I still was sweating bullets. And I remember got on the dance floor with this one lady, and of course she wants to get in nice and tight, very close. And I can remember her face. As soon as she got in nice and tight, she felt my pistol, because I was carrying it in the front of my body. She felt my pistol, and she just looked at me and just got this big smile, because the only people that were carrying inside of the discotheque were cartel members. That was it. So she pinged me for a cartel member, which meant that I was like a gravy ticket for her.
Oh, you're going to be throwing the dollars.
Exactly. So from that point on, I kind of was like on the good side there. I mean, I had it kind of easy at that point from my job perspective, right?
Yeah.
But I'll never forget that smile that she had on her face as soon as she kind of pressed up against me, and she just got this ear-to-ear grin, and that was hilarious. So yeah, that was one of the funnier moments of my career.
I think for me, so I went through a lot of the concealed training and was fortunate enough, did a lot of deployments where that was required full-time, 24/7. And then I'd come back, and anytime I wasn't deploying as a singleton, I was training guys at the NSA. So I'd have a class full of, you name it, all variants of the different intel communities sitting in front of me. And so this 3-month pipeline, a big portion of it was concealed carry. They have to carry the whole time. So we started out with, all right, let's get you trained on guns, get you trained on concealed carry. And then for the next 3 months, you're gonna carry no matter where you are or where you go. Here's your get out of jail card, so it was all cleared at a federal level. So yeah, you're carrying in DC, right, which is unheard of. You're carrying in New York, unheard of. Put them through the training, and then throughout, every class always had some standout things that would happen with these damn guns, right? And then you start learning, oh, I need to add that to training because, for example, if a guy chooses to carry appendix, you have the holster up front, pointed right down at your junk, and it's locked in inside the waistline. Now you've got to go potty, right? And these guys would go in, they'd undo their first button, pull down their zipper, and then before you know it, the gun flaps over, falls into the urinal, or falls into a toilet, right? And the things that would happen, you're always like, I don't understand how this happens, but we got to put that into the class. So now I'm teaching the next class saying, okay, now, when you go potty, be careful. That's a lot of weight up front. And if you unbutton that top button, instead of just
letting it flap
just open your zipper, because that's what it's for, so that you don't have to unbutton or undo a belt, And then it was like, you know what? Just use stalls. If you're gonna go to the restroom, just use a stall just in case things go sideways. That's just number one. Then you get another class, and guys choose to carry it maybe at the 5 o'clock. And they're going up to a street side ATM, pulling up their shirt, showing their gun to the world in DC.
Oh, nice.
Anybody in DC who sees it's gonna call the cops. So you got 5 911 calls going out at the same time. And before that kid gets 2 blocks down the road, I'm getting a phone call as the proctor, showing up. They're sitting on the sidewalk in handcuffs, and having to explain this. So it was always entertaining.
That's
a
number
lot of
lessons
little
learned.
lessons that when it comes to concealed carry, hey, it sounds easy.
Well,
it sounds like, oh, nothing could go wrong. But these guys, government employees working at the highest level of intelligence, prove that they're not that intelligent.
So it's so funny you mentioned the bathroom, because I don't know if you remember, but this happened like over a decade ago, and there was a gun found past airport security in one of the bathroom stalls, left on like the toilet paper dispenser.
Oh, yeah. I've heard those stories.
And I remember after that incident, because it hit national news. I literally wrote a blog on procedures for going to the bathroom.
Specifically number 2.
One or two.
Yeah, 1 or 2.
I covered them both because of that. And it's funny because the way I choose to look at concealed carry is a little bit different. I choose to look at it as more of a I want to live my life. I want to experience all that life has to offer, do all the fun things, but I just want to be armed in the process. How am I going to go and do that, whatever that is, right? And how does me carrying concealed affect that? And what's my solution to that problem, basically? And I have these kind of like, the old what if, what if I'm going to go and do that? What if I'm going to go and do this? Like, what's my answer? What's my solution? And the thing, I think a lot of problems that come from concealed carry is you find yourself kind of like painting yourself into a corner. Like you have only a single system to get the job done. And that system might work for 50% or more of the time. We call it like a range uniform. A lot of people walk around in like a range uniform to carry the gun that they want. And I literally have had a student come up to me, and I've had various students that have come up to me, but this one sticks out in my head because he was so proud of this. His best friend from high school was getting married, and he did his research and found out that the venue was a prohibitive place, so he couldn't carry his firearm. So he opted, because of the way that he carried his gun, not to go to that wedding. I know. I don't understand that. I mean, I'm not saying to break the rules, but I'm asking you, well, if that's all you have, then it's not a surprise that you can't find other solutions to work that scenario. And I hate the fact that somebody chose not to go to a best friend's wedding just because that venue prohibited them from carrying. I mean, if it meant that much to you, maybe you could have come up with another solution. Maybe it's a non-gun solution, but it's something that you can think about. And that's kind of like the real point that I try to get across to people is, hey, find what works really well for you, again, about 50% of the time, but then start to consider all those other circumstances. What are you gonna do when you go for a jog, when you go running, when you go to the weight room, when you go to your kids' sporting events? What are you gonna do when you have to go to a formal event and wear a tuxedo? What are you gonna do parent-teacher conference at a school that is, gun-free zones? What are you gonna do? How are you gonna solve those problems?
Yeah, my 2 cents, if you're a responsible, trained gun owner, and you know how to conceal properly.
Exactly. What's the problem?
I don't see the rules.
What's the problem?
I don't see them. I really don't. It's like I know that I'm not gonna brandish it.
Yeah.
I know I'm not doing warning shots, and I know the only
Thank
time
God.
I'm pulling that thing is if something is really, really bad.
Exactly.
So rules kind of become foggy for me because I'm a responsibly
more like
trained
guidelines.
person. Yeah, it's no different. Yellow lines and white lines on the roads.
And that's a good way to
Merely
look.
suggestions.
And I want people to understand, know the law, and then live your life.
It's good stuff, man. I think we've covered a lot of ground, given a lot of like the basic thought that people probably don't think about.
I hope so.
That there's a lot more responsibility when it comes to carrying. There's a lot of consequence that comes if you make a dumb decision.
100%.
I think this has laid a good foundation. Do you feel like doing some shooting, talking about guns, some holsters?
You're speaking my love language.
All right, let's do this.